If this goes on, don't panic. Bringing hope to the world through speculative fiction.
Today we continue our series on hope and horror. In the last column of this series, our columnist, Paul Jessup, joined us to discuss zombie movies, specifically The Train to Busan and The Night of the Living Dead. This time, he takes a look at some of Stephen King's most iconic work. Paul is a critically acclaimed, award-winning writer of spooky stuff. His latest books are Glass House, a haunted house novel, Skinless Man Counts to Five and Other Tales of the Macabre, a short story collection, and Daughter of the Wormwood Star, a horror novel about a satanic cult. He has been published and translated in many different countries, including England, Ireland, Poland, and Japan. He's an active pro member of the HWA, and he's had publications in countless magazines over the years.
Do not panic. Do not adjust your headphones. There is nothing wrong with your computer or your cell phone. We have taken over this podcast, but do not be alarmed. We are here to talk to you about hope and horror. Hello, I'm your host Paul Jessup, stepping in for a little bit to discuss some light in our collective darkness. Some people would say that hope is anathema to horror, but I would disagree. Horror is a complicated thing, and a very big tent that can fill all sorts of shapes and shadows. Hope doesn't limit horror, but instead expands it. Now let's go back. It all started with The Stand, that television series. Watching it when I did as a young teen in the 90s, sitting in front of that blaring cathode ray tube. I read the book, yes. I read all the Stephen King books, yes. But somehow, someway, watching the Mick Garris adaptation of the book, something clicks into place like a puzzle piece, the last one, just right there. I've been reading a lot of horror at that point, not just Stephen King, also Peter Straub, Clive Barker, and the other big sellers of the 80s and 90s. No, I actually spanned the gamut, picking up forgotten yellow paperbacks from used bookstores, diving into weird finds in the library, poring over classic horror anthology gifted by my grandma when I was 10. I'd watched a lot of horror movies too, probably at all too early an age. Dawn of the Dead, the Halloween and Friday the 13th and Nightmare on Elm Street films. Moving on to New Nightmare, In the Mouth of Madness, and the meta horror films in the 90s, which I was actually old enough to see in the theaters themselves. It was a steady diet of all of it, binge sick on the horror that I craved. But when I read and watched the movies, Stephen King's stuff felt different. The characters were key to that, I think. He could capture voice and personality in just a few sentences, make even the most vile people interesting enough to care about them, even just a little bit. Characters that were either simple or complex, depending on if you watched the movie or the TV adaptations, where the characters were boiled down to their basic traits, or the novels themselves, where they had room to breathe and flesh out and become more than just cardboard. It's amazing to think that even when you cut out all the extra stuff, and there's just a cardboard cutout left, a shadow of the character in the novel, an outline, and nothing more, they still had that spark, still had that personality that only Stephen King could do, and they were still memorable, and you cared about them. And that's a big part of it, yeah. That's a part of why they were different, because these characters had something to them where you wanted to see them come out on top, even if they don't. Even if they go through hell and wind up beaten and bruised and near death. That was a part of it. As a teenager, fresh off existential binge of Sartre and Camus, I was looking for that kind of humanism in the face of despair. Sure, sometime the King got a little too religious and hokey for me and the stuff like The Stand. But there's something else there too. Hope. Hope in the face of horror. And this hope came in the shape of the characters themselves. It was interesting when you think about it. Even the more brutal stories, like Revival, there's some kind of little sliver of hope there, even with Salem's Lot. When the characters live at the end of the books and the short stories, they are beaten and bruised and broken, and yet somehow and possibly still alive. Even if the climax can be a bit hokey, as the denouement always seemed to let the characters breathe just for a little bit. For example, Wendy, at the end of the novel version of The Shining, remind you, novel version, not the movie. She's beaten and bruised and broken, and it'll take a lot to recover, but she did it. She saved her son, and she survived. And they were, at the end, her son on a lake fishing. And little Danny is sad about everything that's happened. The melancholia as a survivor. The same with Wendy. And yet, there's that sliver of hope there. That calmness after all the terror. With Dick Halloran with them, speaking to Danny. All of them recovering. So even though they carried their horrible wounds with them, the scene where Jack beats Wendy near death with the mallet is very brutal and visceral in the book. So much so. In the epilogue, she is still battered. They still see a calmness, a peace, a hope of a new moment and a bright future. Someone asked Stephen King why he didn't kill everyone in The Shining, and he answered that he felt at the end of the day, good things still happen. People still want to be good and do good things. But let's go back to The Stand now and talk about that revelation at the start of this podcast. Now see, horror, especially apocalyptic horror and post-apocalyptic horror like The Stand, is known for being hopeless, of being stories of unrelenting despair. Hunger Games' ending is a prime example of this. Look at the new boss, same as the old boss, but The Stand does things differently. It's about taking a stand in the face of horror and despair, about standing up even if you know it won't matter in the end. The standing itself is the important act, a rebellion against the brutal injustice of the world. It is hope incarnate. And in almost all of Stephen King's works, that is what we see. It reminds me of the book Les Miserables, not the movie exactly, but in the book, there is the scene at the start where Jean Valjean steals a bunch of silverware from a Catholic priest, and the priest lets him go. And again, this is a little religious, even though I'm not a religious person myself. I still find stuff like this interesting about what they say about the world in general. And it applies, I think, even outside of a religious experience and a religious framework. Quoting from memory here, so I'm probably getting this wrong, but he says something like, take the silverware with you. It's fine. I'm not going to call the cops. You take it. But I want you to do good from now on. And he said something along the lines, there's evil in this world, and there will always be evil. But the important thing is that we fight against it, even though we will never win. The fight and standing up is the important thing. Now, some people would see this as kind of like an unrelenting despair, as just sadness upon sadness upon sadness. Like, yes, what is even the point of doing anything? But the point itself isn't winning. It's not the victory. It's the standing. It's the fighting. It's the getting out and doing what needs to be done. Even if you can't make a difference, the action itself will inspire others. The action itself will provide hope, even to yourself. Even in those moments of despair, the action itself will provide hope for you. It's almost in all of King's works. Almost. Now see, the movie version of The Mist definitely does not go this way. And even though I like the idea of the risk of that ending, I don't think it quite worked. Primarily because it felt unlike the characters completely. To go through all that and what they did, the final action didn't feel true to them. And I think that's why it's a shock, is because it feels like out of left field. Like, why did they do this? Now see, if they had layered it better, rather than a quick flip of a twist, I think it would have worked better and actually been a very powerful and poignant ending. And the novella, mind you, does have that layer, even though it doesn't have the brutal ending. It does mention that stuff and leads to that and lays the seeds for that kind of ending. And the movie leaves these out. And I think it's lesser because of that, because it does tack on the ending the novella seems to promise but goes against. If that makes sense. But I digress. Sure, his short stories are more brutal, quick, and angry, especially the older short stories. But I think that has more to do with the nature of horror short stories. You don't have room to breathe and to let hope come through. Do you have time to create the truth that can come from such situations? It's not that they are hopeless exactly, but by necessity, they have to focus on the horror and nothing else. Because that's what short stories are. I mean, I think Poe even said it best, that it's about focusing on a single emotional response. But his novels, especially those written under the moniker Stephen King and not a pseudonym, they're all about hope, about standing in the face of despair and not backing down. Even if you probably won't make it out alive, and even if you do, well, you'll be broken, battered, and changed. Because you can't stand against the darkness without being changed. That's for certain. But somehow, yes, he shows us that the standing itself is important. Because without it, we have nothing. We're just worms crawling in the dirt. And this, my friends, is hope and horror. They're the very things that can terrify us can also heal us and set us free. And before we head off, I'll just to bring up my own bit of hope and horror and the struggle against death and the living against terrifying odds. And that is my next book, Rust Belt Gothic, coming out this October 2026. Come to the small northern Rust Belt town of Copper Creek, Pennsylvania, where time loop spiders hunt down the townspeople, unable to escape. Published by Underland Press and buy it in bookstores everywhere. I won't give away anything that happens in the story. I will just say it's my most terrifying story yet, and at the same time, it's all about what we're talking about here, about standing, about hope and horror. It is about not being final when you're the final girl. But you should read it and find out. I'm not going to tell you anything more. I'm going to leave you all here for now and let the podcast return back to normal. Think about what I've said here and let me know how you experience hope and horror and if it mirrors what we talked about already. And until next time, may the darkness shine bright and the shadows set you free.